I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I am Sunil Dasgupta. The 2022 Maryland primary voting is over. We have early but not final results. The counting of mail-in ballots was delayed because of a bill Governor Hogan vetoed. The uncounted mail-in ballots may not alter the trajectory of some of the big statewide races, but many local Montgomery County races are still too close to call. While we await results, I invited on the show Adam Jentelson, a former staffer for the late U.S. Senator and Majority Leader Harry Reid, who together with Eric Saul, the founder of a local satirical newspaper, Tacoma Torch, and political consultant Jonathan Robinson, created a political action committee, a PAC, or a super PAC as it is commonly known, to defeat incumbent County Executive Mark Elrich based on one issue: Elrich's failure to address housing affordability. Whether they succeeded or not, we will know soon enough. But the entry of a super PAC into county politics became a big bone of contention during the primary. I asked Jentelson about the origins of their PAC and what it means for local politics.
Let them stay or go. You'll always have your own. But take something for granted and it will be taken from you. This I've come to know.
If you're new to the show, I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools, and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. It is my hope that this podcast will help those who feel left out reconnect in our local communities. Music for this episode comes from the Treading Lemmings, a Rockville-based Britpop band in the genre of the Smiths. Their music is available on ReverbNation.com.
I gave yesterday. And if you want to hear my take, let me care. Don't stop one day. She's there, I say. Please won't you share?
In the news roundup, Wes Moore is surging to be the Democratic nominee for the governor of Maryland. Former Labor Secretary Tom Perez was running second with tens of thousands of mail-in ballots uncounted. He may close the gap, but if the breakdown of mail-in ballots is anything like in-person voting, Moore is likely to remain ahead. There seems to be a hunger among Maryland Democrats for an African-American governor. In 2018, the top two vote-getters in the Democratic primary were Ben Jealous and Russian Baker. The one surprise among Democrats is the rout of Peter Franchot, the Democratic state comptroller who had sided with Governor Hogan on his highway expansion projects. Franchot was seen as a frontrunner with sizable fundraising. The real surprise from the primary comes from the other side. The Maryland Republican Party made a surprising choice picking Dan Cox, an avid Trump supporter who organized buses to send protesters to the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, over Kelly Schultz, who is believed to be a moderate and serves as Commerce Secretary in the Hogan administration and had been endorsed by the governor. Schultz was odds-on favorite to win. She lost definitively. This says that the right-wing section of the Republican Party is energized, and moderate Republicans may be staying away or voting Democratic. Already, Hogan has announced that he will not be voting for Dan Cox. No surprises there. Cox tried to impeach Hogan. Will Hogan vote Democratic then? Unclear. There is a Libertarian Party candidate who is also in the race who might allow Hogan to escape the ignominy of voting Democratic. The implications of Dan Cox's victory are quite incredible, actually. The National Democratic Party spent tons of money promoting television ads featuring Trump praising Dan Cox in the hope that a right-wing shift in the Maryland GOP will allow the Democratic nominee for governor to prevail in the general elections in November. This has now happened. So in a sense, it doesn't matter who wins the Democratic primary. The fall campaigns are going to be a referendum on Trump. Second, there's going to be a major increase in attacks on school boards, county and city councils, and other local government bodies. With Maryland likely to become the southernmost abortion-providing state on the East Coast, the fall campaigns are likely to organize around this issue, and the ensuing fight could very well break the consensus Maryland currently has on expanding abortion care in the state. I'll be back with political consultant Adam Jenelson.
Such a cold on a night when nothing was on. Had a feeling about it, couldn't quite explain.
Adam Jenelson, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you. I hate being here.
Good. Everybody does. You inserted yourself into the Montgomery County executive race with a big spending political action committee, or PAC. A day after voting is over, how are you feeling about it?
I would say that we inserted the views of Montgomery County voters and some facts into this race. But I feel very good. I mean, we'll see what happens with the outcome. But our purpose here was to try to show the people of Montgomery County what Mark Elrich's record has been on a critical issue that is confronting the county right now of affordable housing. Our theory was that when confronted with this record, voters would choose not to vote to reelect Mark Elrich. And I think at the time that we started, Elrich was not particularly strong as incumbents go, but was probably on the path to reelection. And I think one way or another, this race closed dramatically. And I do like to think that we had some part in that.
Okay. So in 2018, the same, people ran similar campaigns and got very close results. I mean, at that time, Elrich beat David Blair by 77 votes. So do you think you really changed the trajectory?
If there's a new person in the office, that's a change. So I think part of it depends on what happens with this last batch of mail votes that have yet to be counted. So we'll see there. What the difference this time around was, though, is that Mark Elrich was the incumbent. And typically, particularly in local races where it's local, but it's high profile enough that Elrich is someone whose name gets in the news a fair amount. Sort of local but relatively high exposure. Incumbency is a big advantage usually. in these races. And I think that even though the results might end up being similar to 2018, this wasn't two challengers. This wasn't an open field, or rather an open race with two challengers sort of on equal footing. This was an incumbent versus a number of challengers. And so I think that that is the difference here, that the powers of incumbency, even for a relatively weak incumbent like Elrich, probably would have been enough to carry him through if it weren't for the efforts of many people. I'm not trying to take full credit here, but I think it's hard to do what happened here, which is to at least come very close to unseating an incumbent, and maybe in fact actually unseating one.
Okay, so the last weekend before the primary, Mark Elrich started to respond on Twitter to you specifically, and one of the things that struck me really was that he compared your approach, your policies, to Koch brothers. Now, on the left, Koch brothers is a slur. How do you respond to that?
One reason that it is a slur were the relentless efforts of Senator Harry Reid to highlight the impact the Koch brothers were having on American politics around 2013, 2014, when they were having a big impact but weren't as well known. And I happened to work for Senator Reid at the time as his chief spokesperson and deputy chief of staff. And so I wrote some of those speeches that he gave slamming the Koch brothers. So I'm familiar with what they do, and I certainly know why they are and should be a slur. However, there's a big difference between one pair of brothers trying to shape the entire nation and interested parties having an impact on local races. Mark Elrich himself was the beneficiary of a super PAC. So it's a bit hypocritical for him to sort of make this a major issue. What the Koch brothers did was, spread falsehoods, spread disinformation. We spread ads that were entirely factual, that were backed up in every case by facts. We took an issue that we knew from polling was important to Montgomery County voters. We took an issue that Elrich had been criticized by many progressive interests on for all 4 years that he was in office. So I don't think, look, ad spending is a part of politics. Every Democrat running for elected office in Congress, in the Senate, right now has the support of independent expenditures and PACs. This is just part of the system right now. And using that to get facts in front of voters, to present issues, and to hold elected officials accountable, I think is just part of the business of politics.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Your words written in 2013, 2014 now come to sort of bite you in the back.
A lot has changed in the system since then as well. I mean, I think, if I'm being honest, I think a large part of Democrats' terror at what was happening in the dark money system at the time was the fear that they were going to be completely outmatched. And so I would say that you certainly hear a lot fewer Democrats complaining about outside spending, because what's happened in the last few years is Democrats have actually caught up with Republicans in the money race. By many measures, Democrats are actually ahead of Republicans in outside spending. So I think what is also sort of dawned on people is that this is just the nature of the system right now. And there's no point in fighting with one hand tied behind your back, which I think was probably what Mark Elrich was thinking himself when he accepted the support of super PACs in his own career. So, I think if the ads were not true, if the ads were misconstruing his record, I think there would be an argument there. But everything he said was completely factual, and I think it caused voters to change their opinions in some cases.
Okay, so tell me, how did you get to organize the PAC? What was the evolution of it? How it all came together?
So, the PAC came about because Elrich's record on affordable housing is so uniquely out of step with progressive priorities in this area. This race was a chance to both directly have a positive impact on housing affordability and also perhaps showcase the rise of a new political force here, which is the force of NIMBYism. So I guess, and I want to get to the nuts and bolts part of your question too, which is that we got in touch with a National Philanthropic Foundation. Open Philanthropy is an organization founded by Dustin Moskovitz, who was one of the original founders of Facebook. Dustin, I think, is a believer in what's known as effective altruism, which is essentially doing as much good as you can with the resources available to you. And I think, my own assessment is that, being able to impact affordable housing policy in one of the most populous counties in America is an effective altruistic investment.
You are hypothesizing that a new county executive would lead to better land use policy. But in Montgomery County, the county council has a great deal of influence over land use policy. So why did you choose to focus solely on the county executive race?
Our assessment was, with basically a month to go before the race, let's rather than sort of divide our resources here, let's invest them in the one race that we think will have the single biggest impact on this policy area in this county. But I'll also say that I think that hopefully one of the sort of trickle down effects of this is that everybody in the county takes note and sees that NIMBYism is a force that's on the march, and that voters prioritize housing affordability.
Is that your view of how the county council races are shaping up right now?
Well, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. People can evolve as politicians. I've seen it much in my own career. And so whoever ends up getting elected to the county council, if their prior inclination had been to be towards the NIMBY side of things, part of what we're hoping to do is help educate them and show them why NIMBYism is regressive, why it's my thing with NIMBYism is that it's often wrapped in progressive rhetoric, but what you're actually doing is you're securing very regressive and exclusionary policy outcomes. And I think even sometimes well-meaning people don't follow the policy all the way through to the end point where that outcome has an impact, to see how, even though you think you're doing progressive things, you're actually making Montgomery County more exclusionary, more expensive, and harder to live in unless you're very wealthy.
So narrowly focusing on the county executive race, you had to solve what a coordination problem, essentially, right? There were three major candidates that were running. There was one incumbent and two challengers. How were you trying to solve that problem?
That's right. And on top of that, you've got a very limited amount of data to work from in terms of just basic horse race polling and knowing who is where in the race. So it's challenging. And I mean, it's simplified somewhat by the laws. We're not allowed to coordinate with any candidate or campaign. And so, the basic thing you have to decide when you're founding an organization like this is, are you going to be anti somebody, or are you going to be in favor of someone or some group of people? And, our solution to the problem you described was to focus narrowly on being anti-Elrich, because, we didn't know which of his challengers, especially at the time that we started, some of the spending by Blair was coming online and was being reported, but it wasn't clear whether he or Reamer were going to be the more viable challengers to Elrich, and then I think getting consensus among people about getting behind one candidate isn't especially in this particular space, is harder than getting consensus about being anti somebody. I think you've seen that across the county. I mean, there was that group that formed notmarkelrich.org, that website. Like a lot of people, a broad range of people can agree that he was the wrong candidate, and then people had more disagreements about who was better. And so factoring in all those things, our assessment was the most effective contribution we can have is to highlight the facts about Elrich's record for voters and try to make them, not support him, and then leave it up to them who to choose among the other candidates. And again, like I said, we have very limited amount of data. Some people automatically assume that Hans Riemer drew only from David Blair and vice versa. There is, within the limited data that we have, there is some that suggests that Riemer might have drawn equally from both. That there were some progressives who were very unhappy with Mark Elrich, who didn't want to vote for Blair, and that there were some people who didn't, were maybe coming at it from a different perspective, who didn't want to vote for Elrich. So like, you do the thought experiment: what would have happened if Hans had dropped out earlier in the race? And I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know that it would have been an automatic windfall for Blair. It could have easily gone equally to those people. We see this a lot in races. I mean, if your listeners think back to the 2020 Democratic primary, you saw this a lot, where people assumed, if Elizabeth Warren drops out, all her support's going to go to Bernie, when in fact her support was spread pretty evenly between Biden and Bernie. People are complicated, and they support people for different reasons. And I think trying to sort of play chess master, it can quickly get you into trouble. And so that's why, we had a simple mission. I think, simplicity and clarity of purpose is very beneficial in these situations. We knew that on principle, on merit, we disagreed vehemently with Elric. Different people involved in the effort had different opinions about who should replace him, but we all sort of agreed that anybody else would be better than Elrich, especially on this particular issue. So we could do one thing here, which was to confront Elrich head on and to educate voters about his record, and that's what we did.
In the professional world of politics, we know that negative campaigning works, right? But a lot of people, like common people, when you talk to them, they dislike negative campaigns. And so that is one kind of criticism that was leveled, I believe, against your approach. And the second one is that, do you bring in money from outside of Montgomery County, doesn't matter who it is, and then try to, quote unquote, buy the election?
I think it is entirely within the acceptable bounds of politics to criticize your opponent. I think that it is frankly, on some level irresponsible if you think somebody is enacting bad policy that is hurting people, to not tell the voters that this policy is bad and it's hurting people. And, so I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think that, this is sort of a micro case of bearing out that dichotomy of voters sort of, complaining about negative ads on the one hand, but responding to them on the other. Because, Elrich certainly didn't gain any support once the spending started. We don't know how this race is going to turn out, but from every available poll, he was higher before the spending started than he was after the spending. And so it doesn't seem like there's a single voter who was originally not going to vote for Elric, and then switched over to vote for Elric, or at least he didn't seem to add a single voter to his total. He lost several voters. So I think people get annoyed at the ads. They see them all the time. But as a political professional, I have to say that just means your message is getting through. And look, if they disagree with our assessment, they wouldn't work. If people in Montgomery County felt like housing was affordable and they were happy with the way things were going, and that everything was costing less, and that frankly they were happy with Elrich's performance in office, the ads wouldn't work. But because it tells them something that resonates with their own lived experience, the ads were effective.
Do they work primarily by, dissuading people from voting for a candidate, or can they also have a sort of more positive impact for, boosting somebody else's numbers?
Something people will note about this election, because it's true, is that it was very low turnout. So, you could contend that perhaps the negative ads contributed to that. I think that's probably not true, that we had this weird year where because the redistricting, the whole thing got punted till, months later into the middle of summer travel season. I think that's a more likely explanation because the low turnout is evident in early voting and mail ballots, some of which was going on before the ads starting. So I don't know. But I think that there is attacks in politics have been a part of politics since the earliest days. And if you go back and read about what politics was like in the 19th century, where attacks on people's family, attacks on people's religion, ethnicity, race, all this stuff was in many ways, much more virulent, not just because racism was more, acceptable in political discourse, although it's kind of making a comeback these days. But because it's part of the nature of the beast. And I think my own, personal ethics about it are that your attacks have to be true, that they have to, be educating voters about something that is relevant to the political sphere. But I think that, if they sort of meet those criteria, then that is part of the process. And I think, look, if politician is, it's a give and a take. And then if the politician is skilled, they can turn an attack back around on the opponent. I mean, it's part of the give and take of politics.
Well, that happened too. Elrich turned the attack back at you. And it turned out that there is another PAC that was formed about the same time as you were. And the messages got mixed up somehow. What happened there?
That's one of those things that's just a coincidence. And frankly, it made our lives, I think, a little bit trickier because we both ended up announcing, I think, within 24 hours of each other. And I think our own plan.
What is your PAC called? So
my PAC is called Affordable Maryland.
Okay. What is their PAC called?
The other PAC is called Progressives for Progress. And I think the reason it was complicated was that, we had our own planning for our, what you call a rollout, for how we were going to announce our PAC and what we plan to do. And part of what we do value transparency. I mean, we're very clear about who we are, what we plan to do, where our money is coming from. It was all in our press release, announcing the thing. It was and we contacted the Washington Post to try to get them to write about us because we wanted to tell people what we're doing. So, we wanted to put all the information out there. And it turned out that on the same day, this other PAC launched as well. And part of what we wanted to communicate to Montgomery County residents about who we are is that we were, coming from the sort of philanthropic space, that this was part of a larger policy focus, and that we were in this for policy motivated reasons. And, I'm sure Progressive Progress would say that they are too, but it complicated things.
Speak a little bit about Progressives for Progress and who they are, and so to distinguish between yourselves and them.
We were founded to go after Elrich on housing, and highlight his record on that issue. They decided to endorse candidates. It sort of gets back to what I was saying about the mechanics of this, where as an organization, you have to sort of, when you file with the FEC, literally there's a line that says, are you anti somebody or are you pro somebody? And you have to say in that line. So they took the pro approach, where they were going to, support a range of candidates and endorse.
Yeah. So it's also interesting that they are, in fact, from the development community, right?
That's right.
And
that's
you
right.
are not. I mean, I think that's a big distinction.
The first $500,000 that was invested in us, which at the time was all we thought we were going to spend, came from Dustin Moskowitz. But I want to be really clear in the interest of transparency that later on, developers did decide to support our mission. But we didn't know that when we started out. And it was some of the same people who were involved in Progressives for Progress. So I want to be clear that is part of where our support ended up coming from. But when we launched, we thought that the investment from Open Philanthropy was what we had to work with. All of our planning was based on that. I'd like to think that because we were effective at advancing this issue, and that it caused others to want to support us. So that's what ended up happening. I would just make one further point, which is that, you can decide that there are certain people who are off limits, that you're not going to take their money, that they are so offensive to you personally, that you, even if they're only giving you money to do the thing you were going to do anyway, that it would be a moral compromise to not take their money. We don't feel that way about developers. I don't feel any strong way about developers one way or the other, just like I don't have strong feelings about restaurateurs. Some are good, some are bad. I think in housing, you need strong government involvement to make sure that buildings meet, certain codes, environmental standards, and affordability standards. But somebody's got to build those houses. And the big lesson that the housing community, the housing affordability community broadly agrees on is that the main way to combat our housing crisis is to build more housing. And research study after research study shows that it doesn't even really matter what type of housing it is. And yes, even if it ends up being all luxury apartments, which would not be my preference, but let's say it does, that still reduces costs for everybody because it adds supply. And what we are experiencing is a dramatic supply shortage.
Jamie Raskin, who is iconic in Montgomery County and now across the country, ended up, after hesitating a bit, endorsing Elrich the weekend before the primary. Do you think your spending precipitated that decision?
I love Jamie Raskin. I'm a constituent. I am a big fan of his, going back actually to when I was in high school in the area, which we could talk about. But I just want to address the question. It's entirely possible that it did, and there was one of the reasons I think that is that the week before there was a press availability where Jamie and Elrich were appearing together, and Jamie was asked if he was going to endorse, and he demurred and said, words along the lines of, I trust the people of Montgomery County. And a bit of an awkward moment for Elrich. I think it didn't. At that point, I think a lot of people thought he wasn't going to endorse. And then, as you point out, then he sort of reversed course and came out a few days later over the weekend to endorse. And it is entirely possible that the spending was part of his motivation. I think he said words to that effect, or sort of alluded to that in his.
One of the criticisms also has been that this is outside money, but you're not an outsider, right?
No.
Tell us about why you're rooted here.
I grew up here. We moved to Montgomery County when I was 6. I went to Montgomery County Public Schools from first grade through high school. I went to Blair High School. I was the first class to graduate from what I still refer to as the new Blair in Four Corners in the class of '99. And, which the first day we moved in was already too small for the population. That's probably another podcast. A very important one. We were in Adamsburg in DC, from 2005 until 2017. 2017, we moved back to Montgomery County. So we've been very local for a long time. I first met Jamie when I was in high school. And at the time, if some of your longtime listeners may remember this issue, it was called the Shades of Gray incident. And Montgomery Blair High School produces a student-run television network. I'm actually not sure. I don't know if it's on the internet. I don't know if it's a YouTube channel these days. Back in the 90s, it was a cable access TV series. Mm-hmm. And one of the shows was a current event show called Shades of Gray. Students, I think 2 years ahead of me, produced an episode of that show on gay marriage. And this was, I think, about 96 or 97. The county school board refused to air that episode. And so the students who ran the network, under the guidance of a teacher named Mr. Lloyd, who is still in the area, I hope he listens, was one of my early heroes and one of the best teachers I've ever had, Christopher Lloyd, not the actor, a great educator. So, through the course of about 3 years, it took a couple of years to litigate this case up to the school board. And so the kids who produced the show graduated, and I rose up, junior, senior year, and ended up being in a position at the television station when this case came before the school board. So I was one of the ones who went to testify. And the person who took our case pro bono who was, I believe, head of the DC chapter of the ACLU at the time, was none other than Jamie Raskin. And he advocated hard for us. I think we may have testified before the school board at the same time. I little felt fuzzy on that. But anyway, I as a young high school student, I got my first impression of this crusading civil rights activist who I just immediately adored. And we won, by the way. We won our case, and the episode was eventually aired.
Adam Gentleson, thank you for coming on I Hate Politics.
Sunil, it was great to be here. I don't actually hate it. I had a great time.
A drunken buzz, much like any other. I can play better than this one, that's all. Like a hill of grape shot, he hit the ceiling. The ginger man really shook the wall.
What lessons can we draw from my conversation with Adam Gentleson, chair of the anti-Mark Eldridge PAC called Affordable Maryland? First, the housing issue, or zoning wars as I like to call it, have arrived in Montgomery County. Many homeowners see the prospect of removing single-family zoning as destroying their homes and neighborhoods, and have organized in their civic associations, local listservs, and even as campaigns. These are the NIMBYs, which is short for Not in My Backyard. On the other side from them are newcomers, immigrants, lower-income families, their children and grandchildren, who are shut out of neighborhoods with good schools and easy transit to job centers. These are the YIMBYs, folks who say, yes, in my backyard. There is political asymmetry between NIMBYs and YIMBYs. In the neighborhoods and in local government, NIMBYs are well organized. YIMBYs are generally younger and stronger on social media. The Affordable Maryland PAC that Gentleson created with few like-minded friends finally brings resources to the YIMBY side. Whoever wins the county executive race going forward, suburban Montgomery County is going to receive policy attention usually reserved for housing issues in San Francisco and New York. Combined with a commitment from the White House to reward local jurisdictions willing to relax zoning laws, the YIMBY agenda is gathering power. Second, there's a future coordination question in the alliance between the Affordable Maryland PAC and the developers who funded Progressives for Progressives PAC. Holy peas, Batman, who thought up all of that? That alliance may agree on removing Mark Eldridge, but does not agree on how to actually solve the housing supply problem. For the most part, developers have not wanted the removal of exclusive zoning that YIMBY advocates, including Gentleson, want. Indeed, it is the ambivalence of developers toward broad zoning reform that is part of what's holding back supply. There are more smaller zoning changes in specific locations, for example, which YIMBYs and developers agree on, but philosophically they are divided, and practically the prospect of rezoning Potomac would be a non-starter in their embrace. Lastly, we are also seeing the entry of national political tactics at the local level broadly. It seems that Democratic activists stymied in national politics are starting to bring their professional skills in polling, fundraising, media management, and yes, super PACs to local politics. And with it will come two local campaigns, hardball politics, we have seen before at the national level. The sums of money we're talking about are likely to be small compared to national campaigns, but this new money will bring professionalization. As it happened at the national level, some will decry this change and others will rejoice in it. It depends on whether this new force benefits them. As a general rule, Those with power will not like this intrusion because it will undermine local power structures, including, for example, how county parties may be run. To all those who tried our interactive voter guide, IHP bot, and provided feedback, thank you. We will keep working on it, and we will be back. That's all for this episode. You've been listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Music for this episode comes from the Treading Lemmings, a Rockville-based Britpop band. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at ihppod@gmail.com or reach out on Twitter at ihppod. I hope you'll subscribe and share the show as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.